1, 2, 3, yeah! This is Amari Purple Talk. Yes. Execute Order 6. Welcome to episode 66 of Amari Purple Talk, a podcast where I share my thoughts on the Prince musical singularity. I'm Richard Cole, your imagination funk soloist. Thank you once again for tuning in. Please leave your comments in the comment section below, and please download on your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And with that out of the way, let's go crazy. Okay, so we're approaching not only the holiday season, we're coming up on the end of the year as well. We're trying to balance the scales of one of the most challenging decades of this current century. We've used our voices for change, but we still have lots of voice left to use. And most of you are still on ground zero. Shout out to all you doctors, nurses, and first responders, while myself and others are on the front lines. Of course, not having been furloughed or able to work from home, shout out to those on the front lines and shout out to those that are at home for various reasons. So the next 3 weeks after this first round of holy days, for me, will be very busy. And while the essentially non-essential essential will dominate my schedule, I wanted to give the next few episodes a singular focus that I hope will inspire you, as well as keep me motivated, as the next 3 episodes are my inspiration to make some changes. Therefore, this 3-part series is dedicated to the 257,000 souls that are no longer here physically, as well as the brothers and sisters that have senselessly lost their lives to systemic racist violence. We will continue to try to leave this planet a little better than how we found it. Let's have a moment of silence for all of those individuals, and let's generate some positive energy for those that are still keeping on. Peace and thank you. And Hatep. All right, so we've had the book, The Beautiful Ones, out for over a year. It's a book I've enjoyed, and I've referenced quite a number of times on various episodes of Amari Purple Talk. So basically what I wanted to cover the next 3 episodes are kind of the takeaways and probably Prince's original intention for releasing this book. Unfortunately, he was only able to document about 50 pages or so, but the person designated to work with him, or Prince designated to work with, Dan Piepenbring, did a very great job given the circumstances of putting this book together. And to me, the power isn't just within the 50 pages that Prince wrote, although that carries a lot of weight and is very powerful. The introduction sets the mission statement well, I thought. This won't be a review of the book. but this book will be sort of the catalyst. Again, it has always been inspiration to me this last year. And with the topics we're going to tackle, not only during this episode, but the next two, there will be references to this book. So if you have not had a chance to read this book, there will be spoilers. But I recommend you go get it. It's a must-have for your bookshelf. Sometimes a little goes a long way. And this book delivers it big time. So by all means, go pick up The Beautiful Ones. It should still be at if you're still able to go to a bookstore. If not, if you can order it, by all means, order it and get it. So to me, one of the three major points, or I should say the mission statement of The Beautiful Ones, it breaks down into freedom, ownership, and the definition of funk. And today we are going to talk about freedom. And we're going to cover some albums. That's right, albums. We're going to cover some albums. So we're going to talk about things like the Gold Experience, the Come album, Emancipation. So we're going to kind of cover roughly 93 to 96 in that period. But I want to start with reading just a little section of page 32 of the introduction to The Beautiful Ones. So again, if you don't have the book and don't want any spoilers or anything, skip ahead a few minutes. I'll try to leave a cue when you should jump right back in. So, all right. So page 32 of The Beautiful Ones. And this is Prince talking to Dan Pipingbrink. And this section goes, "The book should be a handbook for the brilliant community, wrapped in an autobiography, wrapped in a biography. It should teach that what you create is yours. Say, we've got this if we're left alone. So he remembered a dude in my community 10 times smarter than me, though he didn't want to name him in the book. What if he had the opportunities the Bush daughters had? It was incumbent on us to help people, especially young black artists, realize the power and agency they had." So here, Prince isn't speaking just about intellectual property, which is something over the last 10, 15 years has sort of become the new currency. But he's also talking about disenfranchisement. He's talking about systemic racism, institutionalized racism in this. There's too many communities that for that one or two individuals that come out of that and say make it to the big time, whether it's entertainment or sports or some educational mountain to climb as well. There's a lot of people, often brilliant, that get lost in the shuffle. And if the society isn't going to give them the tools, if they don't have access to it, then it does kind of become our responsibility to build and create tools that they can have access to. And not only was this book intended to be sort of that blueprint for that, it was meant to reach the masses, for those fans that grew up in different areas, whether it's in different parts of the United States or any place around the world that's looking in, and though maybe oftentimes sympathetic, don't really understand what that experience is or what that experience is like, to live like that. There was a period in the 90s with hip hop to where, There were suburban communities and places around the world, they're hearing, what goes on. Because at that time, rap was, in Chuck D's words, the CNN of black music, and it was a culture shock. But it became the mission statement, or part of the mission statement of this book, because he was fortunate to kind of come out of those conditions. And I mean, Minneapolis, it has a small black population. So to a kind of a smaller degree, its effects were similar to what was going on in, say, Chicago, or what goes on in St. Louis, or what goes on in New York during that time. But not only was that important, what really made it important was that, yes, once he made it, and after a certain point, he realized that all the fame, all the success, and all the money, that there can still be chains placed upon you. And, here he was on the shoulders of some of the biggest in the industry, that paved the way for his success, whether it starts with Louis Jordan, or whether it starts with Ray Charles, whether it's James Brown, whether it's Jackie Wilson, Sam Cooke, the Jackson 5, Motown. There are these overwhelming, Little Richard, these overwhelming success stories that always have that similar ending, to where they're either broke or they're not owners in their own game. I mean, Ray Charles, Sam Cooke, James Brown can be exceptions. But again, when it comes to black artists, it's that when they transition, or the circumstances that led to that transition, then that sort of ownership, it somehow gets lost and swallowed up by the conglomerate somehow. To where, it's such a conspiracy theory that you kind of want to believe it's true sometimes. And, recently we've been kind of on the sign of the times high. But that was sort of the first major realization that his creativity, or his freedom, was being shackled. There's a minor incident with the song Let's Work back during controversy, actually before there was a controversy album. Prince wanted to do a song called Let's Rock. And it was based off of, it was a popular dance craze around 79, 80. Cool little dance. It was cool to do. And he wanted to kind of jump on that bandwagon and, create an anthem for it. And that was kind of the first time that Warner Brothers said, no, you can't put that out, or we don't want you to put that record out. But the whole thing with, later on, the Crystal Ball album being a 3 LP set, magnificent music. I mean, how it would have stood had it been released, who knows? We look at it and go, all the songs that were left off of Sign of the Times were great. We got to hear most of them later on in, some form or other. But again, Warner Brothers was like, cost too much to manufacture. We'd have a hard time marketing it. People might not have time to listen to 3 LPs. They told him no. And that was sort of the first thing that brought him down. If you've been listening to the story of Sign of the Times, or anything that you've read about that period, even in the liner notes of the 1998 Crystal Ball compilation, the liner notes for the song Good Love, that was a very happy period. Probably the highest creativity period of his career. And that was, part of the thing that derailed that happiness was the fact that Warner Brothers said, nope, got to make it 2 LPs, can't make it 3. Then you fast forward to 1992 and the famous $100 million contract that he signed, which, that was one of the highest record deals in history. But there was a lot of stuff in that fine print that stifled, Prince's creative freedom. His ability to do what he wanted. Realized that it would have cost him the complete loss of ownership of his master recordings, or the fact that he didn't have it in the first place. It was the fact that it would be a long, hard fight to get it back, which it ended up being, was a long, drawn-out fight to get it back. There was also publishing. There's, situations where certain songs could end up as samples on somebody's record, and times when Prince didn't really co-sign on that. So who was getting paid for that, and who authorized that? And then there's just the ability to put out what you want, what you feel, what you create. And again, we're talking about the music industry in this particular case, but him wanting to impart that message of freedom, or him allowing us to share his journey, because he could have done this quietly. He could have just not made any statements. So I'm in 1993. He didn't have to change his name to an unpronounceable symbol. He could have just turned in an album to Warner Brothers and they wouldn't have known any different. They could have said, oh, well, you need P. Diddy to remix this track here or do that or whatever. But he didn't have to let us in on what little he did, or given the chess game he had to play to do it, he didn't have to let us in on that and share in the journey, to champion his cause, to where, from 1993 on, any time that he was on an award show or a talk show and he spoke about freedom and ownership and what he was dealing with, we champion that. If you go back and watch a lot of those old clips, every sentence, there was this rounding applause. He let us in on it and he shared it with us, because at the same time, music is powerful and it's inspiring. And no, not all of us are in the music business per se. Not all of us are in some weird contract or another, whether, we're up here or down here. It's a thing of sometimes you show up to your job. You give that 100%. You give that 110%. You earn your paycheck and then some. The problem is they're not giving you the and then some. And you see companies that do take some initiative and say, okay, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're asking you to be on the front lines. We're asking you to be essential. So therefore, we're going to give you a little bit extra per hour. We're going to give you a little bit extra time off. It's something, to be fair on some level of fairness. And then there's other places that just simply don't, and there are places that are gambling with lives and in the interest of public perception or public relations, hiding numbers, or, somebody gets sick or something and, the place doesn't close or whatever. It's those type of shackles, that your freedom is stifled at that particular point. And the reality is you can't go to your employer and say, hey, can I get like, 50 grand so I can do this? No, you don't have that type of freedom. It doesn't exist. We all got suckered, those old, what do you call it? Those old Jimmy Stewart movies or whatever, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, whatever movie it is, where you see the kid, he starts off in the mailroom and he works up and, sometimes they marry the boss's daughter or whatever, but sometimes they work their way up to the top and all of that. And that's just not the reality. A lot of these companies are set up for the whoever started it. It's set up for their legacy. And in certain situations, depending on what you look like, they're not going to hand you the keys to the company just because you are smart enough to do it or brilliant enough to do it or you have the skill set to do it. No, sometimes you have to do your own thing. And don't get it twisted. Not everybody's meant to do that. And a lot of times that's not everybody's calling in life. But freedom means you put yourself in a position where you're happy doing it, where there's a balance, there's a positive situation, a positive relationship. So in 1993, Prince read the fine print and was like, okay, if I can't change it, I got to get out of it. And, that led to me, that's my second favorite Prince era. Like I said, I'm an 80s kid. The 80s were my high school and college years. So, in the words of Biggie, I live out there, so don't go there. But that don't mean a brother can't hear some nice beats in the East. And, once I think once he decided to change his name to that symbol, and once he decided that as Prince, Warner Brothers was only going to get vault material, that the stuff he was creating, it wasn't just Emancipation, where he was saying that's what freedom sounds like. No, what freedom was sounding like was that energy that was put into Peach, or Come, or Dark, Race, Pope, Space, Let It Go, Dolphin. That was, it was a different mindset. It was a different vocabulary. The only comparison I could make would be another Gemini, which is Paul McCartney. There was a language or a musical language he had when he was a Beatle, but what he was doing with Wings was totally different. It went in a whole different direction, whether you got into some songs or not, but it worked, because he stopped thinking like a Beatle and had to start thinking like himself. Same thing with Lennon, John Lennon. I think all of them had to kind of go through that. I don't know, maybe except for Ringo, I guess, but they all had to go through that. But the energy in which these tracks or I should say these tracks that ended up on both Come and the Gold Experience, again, we did an episode a couple of weeks ago. What if things were different? What if these songs, like if you took Pink Cashmere, still made that a single, you had Peach, the original version of Come, Love Sign, Endorphin Machine, Dark, Interactive, Race, Pheromone, Pope, Space, Let It Go, Loose, Dolphin, Even Orgasm, put all of those, if that was like the final statement, the final Prince statement, and didn't have to say anything to any of us. Just drop that album. We did it was a complete what if scenario. Like, what if that was the last Prince album, and then anything, or one of the scenarios was anything we got after that was just vault material, but different. It wasn't the old Friends for Sale thing. Like it would have been some beloved tracks, or maybe not all of them, maybe not all the great stuff. Maybe we would have gotten Rebirth of the Flesh sooner, who knows? But what if this was like that last definitive statement? Just the energy of these songs had things had gone a little bit differently in his battle with Warner Brothers. And, we think it's great. We know it's great. But, I feel these songs will have a chance to breathe again depending on how Sony handles this era from this point forward. Because you could still re-release Come in its original configuration. But what I would love to see, since because of The Most Beautiful Girl in the World and that stupid, ridiculous lawsuit, I would love to see this era treated as like some sort of compilation or box set, and just forget about releasing Come, forget about releasing the Gold Experience. You could just do like a 1 or 2 CD thing, or you could do a box set of the whole era, depending on what vault tracks are in there. And, I've always been inspired by this period. Not to the magnitude of now. I'm more inspired by this period now than, even 10 years ago or 15 or 20 years ago. There were little things, that kind of, in the back of your mind that kind of stand out, because you're fighting for, you're always fighting for your self-respect, and especially if you're black, if you're in that type of corporate world or whatever, you're fighting for your self-respect, because it's hard to gauge what perception of you is being read. And you have to fight to maintain your self-identity, your self-worth, your self-respect. You go through those battles. But I'd say, like I said, no more so now than before. And again, he didn't have to share this part of his life with us. Like I said, if you want to get to know him, know the music. And again, by making the statement in 93, what his intentions were, and kind of as the years went on, we kind of got to peel back the layers, or he let us peel back the layers to see what this fight was about, and to rally the fan base, to stand behind it. Like, oh, this is what he's going through. Oh, yeah, next album that dropped, that Gold Experience, when that drops, yep, picking that up. Chaos and Disorder. It's like, yeah. Now, I love that album more now than I did then, but, it's that thing. It's like, oh, I'm still getting it, it's like the song says, I got an army 3 million strong. And, if that was the population of the fan base as of 1994, yeah, we did our best. Not every song went platinum. Not every album went platinum. But like I said, we were the diehards. We were there to at least get something to gold, or, at least it got enough airplay someplace, or, we championed it. And it just was not the situation in which, in a perfect world, a record company would have put the marketing dollars behind it to really get that out there. Because I think if it was, I don't know, I think if the Come and the Gold Experience would have been, or it would have just been maybe just the Gold Experience, depending on which songs were were on it. I think it still would have been the Gold Experience, but I think it would have been a different album than what we're used to. I think that even A Most Beautiful Girl in the World would not have existed anyway if it was a perfect world, or if things went differently. Where it's like, hey, I'm going to put out this batch of songs. Most of them are going to have these one word titles. And then after that, it's all vault stuff. And then, whether it's 96 or 2000, he reemerges with, some of the best music ever. And he's talking to Rolling Stone and, kind of what he had been doing the last, 20 some odd years is doing interviews. But the interviews would have been different. Maybe not so much as cryptic. It would have been like, nah, this was the journey. This was what was going on. It'd be kind of like a Dave Chappelle thing almost. Which actually still ended up happening. You got a great album with Emancipation. The Rainbow Children, another great album. He got to put out what he felt. So if he felt like news, you got that album. If he felt like expectation, you got that album. If he felt like I'm just going to do an album on the piano, One Night Alone, you got that album. So we did get it eventually, but it's, again, where it's us that only appreciates that period or that effort. It's like, somebody like a Neil Young can do that all day, every day. And Rolling Stone is like, oh, it's greatest thing ever. Oh, that Neil Young, he's so great. But with Prince, it's like, yeah, it's substandard Prince. It's Prince being lazy. It's Prince doing it. And we're like, no, this stuff is great. Nobody else does that. Maybe McCartney comes close. Maybe Frank Zappa comes close. But no, this stuff is great. Take another listen to it. This stuff is great. Listen. And, this journey was not a walk in the park. There were doors that were literally closed. I mean, Warner Brothers, they phased out the Paisley Park label. They limited the access to marketing. They were given an album, with little cooperation from the artist to say, well, okay, well, what do we do with this? How do we market this? What was your thinking? What's the plan? There was, contract obligation album. Then there was the Gold Experience. And he wanted to put out both, which was ahead of its time. Years later, you get Beyonce that puts out 2 albums back to back. I think Kanye has done it too. 2 albums back to back, and both kind of have this sort of dual identity thing happening. He did it first. I mean, that would have been cool too, to have both of those drop the same day, Come and the Gold Experience. I think that would have been awesome. And again, it would have not included Most Beautiful Girl in the World. Warner Brothers kept insisting that would be on that album just to kind of cash in. They, taking advantage. It's like, oh, he did that by himself and had a hit with it and didn't use us for the marketing, and it still became a hit. Freedom. And, without that sort of major label support, then, the big tour, there were doors closed on that level. And basically what he did, it was pretty grassroots, Of course, he had to do a lot of it in England. I mean, not just England, but he had to do a lot of it in Europe. And his only avenues here were, maybe a little tiny club here or there. He had 2 clubs of his own, Glam Slam in Minneapolis and Miami, and of course, he always still, he still had Paisley Park, which, hey, charge a few bucks a head, come to my house and jam. So, but given that it was not an easy road, you still got 1,000%, and not just on record. You got 1,000% in touring. Well, not touring, but the performances. There's a sort of collector item, bootleg, whatever you want to call it, of the Miami shows at the Glam Slam. And man, that is some funk that's being generated on that. I know I recommended that as something the estate should consider putting out as a standalone release, or even a box set, or however they want to do it, or a 3 CD set, since it's like 3 nights, but I don't know how many CDs it would actually fill up. But just do the complete shows. Just do them all, however many discs it takes. But that is some funk. That is a man on a mission. And the band was right there behind him to help execute that mission. That was, taking it back to, almost the Chitlin circuit, just paying dues just to keep the money rolling in, to keep fighting this battle, or in hopes that eventually this situation will come to a resolution. And to do that for 3 years, that would have, I don't know, a lesser artist would have crushed under the weight of that. But again, by sharing the journey, by inviting us along for the ride, then we're able to, in different forms, whether it's you as a fan and you attended one of the shows, if you were one of the ones that bought Come or the Gold Experience, things like that, and we're able, those of us that have shows, that have podcasts now, and that period is a favorite of a lot of the podcast hosts, we're able to document that moment in history and go, wow, he stood up, not only for himself. It wasn't just about him. After the fight, and we'll get into that with the ownership chapter of the show, but that is inspiring to all artists. And you see some, to some degree, some are uber famous. I don't know, look at like a Chance the Rapper doing things on his own terms. I don't know if he's with a label still. I think he's just been doing his own stuff. Nipsey Hussle, that's another one. There are cats that have been doing it, that may have looked to that as an inspiration, or, were maybe kind of young and coming up and learning what that was about. But, there's still artists out there that are still getting ripped off. You hear everything you hear Taylor Swift doing now. We're like, yeah, that's what Prince was talking about 20 years ago. Where were you? Weren't you listening? That wasn't, but see, that was the thing too. And he put his livelihood on the line for that too, in the name of freedom. He sacrificed so much because, changing that name to a symbol, it did wreck him for a while. Even after leaving Warner Brothers, to me personally, I always maintain that Emancipation should have been released under the name of Prince. We didn't know at the time there was still a publishing contract that was still hanging over his head. But with that symbol, in 93, 94, 95, 96, even 97, 98, people that weren't diehard Prince fans were laughing at him. Like, he's gone mad, he's gone weird. Oh, that's just crazy. Or, I'm sure you've all heard this one. You going to, where you going? Oh, man, I'm going to the record store. I'm going to buy that, Prince got a new album out. Prince, he's still making music? I'm sure you've heard. Stop me if you've heard this one. It was career suicide, but he was able to rise from the ashes like a phoenix on that. By 2000, it was a road back. Circumstances like, say, 9/11 and kind of the fallout from that may have prevented, and also to not having major label support either. But things like that may have hindered the Rainbow Children from being released. I mean, not being released, but from being heard by the masses. That 2000 to 2004, that was a road back. That was some fighting back. And, it worked. And for the next several years, I mean, he stayed consistent. It's like, yeah, I'm able to make record deals on my terms. Hey, I'll go with Sony 1 minute on this album, but hey, I get to keep the masters. Okay, I'm gonna do a deal with Universal on the next one, see what they talking about. Cool, I get to own the masters. And he still continued to fight with Warner Brothers all the way up to 2014 when he got him back. It's sad that he wasn't really able to enjoy the fruits of that. But a win, we'll take the win. We'll take the W on it. We'd rather have him back. But, I think maybe the message is that he was able to do it. And if he was able to do it in whatever you're doing, whether you're in the music business, the internet is a wide open field now. It was back then, and he pioneered a lot. And there was a lot of, for a superstar, there was a lot of indie label sensibilities, or indie label tendencies going on with him, So if you're, regardless of what your genre is, regardless of what age you are, we have these computers now. You can make an album, you own it, you can sell it. And if you're selling CDs out the back of your car, your trunk, you're getting your $7, whatever the manufacturing cost is, whatever your markup is, you're getting your $7 a CD or whatever, as opposed to, with Prince and Michael Jackson, during their biggest albums, we're probably barely getting a quarter to 50 cents a record, which I think in Michael Jackson eventually ended up becoming $1.25 a record, or Prince ended up getting $1.25 a record at some point. But when you control the board, you getting $7 a CD. Which is why, something like Emancipation, Crystal Ball, even New Power Soul, which isn't among my favorite. It's got some good songs on it, but it's not one of my favorite Prince albums. And I think that sold only 100,000 copies. Only 100,000 copies compared to 16 million of Purple Rain or whatever. Even 2 million that was Sign of the Times, 6 million for Batman, whatever the numbers are. But because he kept the lion's share of the money, he made more money off of New Power Soul than probably what he did with, say, maybe not this, I don't, he could have made more, even more with Purple Rain, but he made a lot with Purple Rain. But let's just say, he made more with New Power Soul than he did with Sign of the Times, or maybe even Batman, really. To say that $2 to $6 million range in sales for those albums. He made more money with New Power Soul. So, again, like I said, the key word keep coming back to is inspiring. Again, if you're in the music business, if you just go to a 9 to 5, in his own words, any place where there's a ceiling placed on you, that's, what he called slavery. And, there isn't a law on the books that says, oh, you can't be happy at your job. There's plenty of things, whether it's a company's guidelines or whatever, you can't do this, you can't do that, you're only allowed to do whatever. But for me, the takeaway has been, don't confuse responsibility for what your purpose is, for what you love to do. You have a right to enjoy what you want to do. And nobody can tell you otherwise. And sometimes it's a matter of just doing it. Sometimes you got to fight that fight like Prince fought his fight. You may have to have your own unpronounceable name moments. You may have some doors that are closed to you, but that journey to where you're trying to get to is where that feeling of freedom is going to come from. So I'm going to end this with another Prince quote from page 35. Again, like I said, this is a must-have book. The introduction, it's powerful in itself. And like I said, the 50 pages and everything, like I said, for those that have it already, hey, let me know your thoughts about what you thought of the book. But for those that don't have it, like I said, I recommend you get it. But here's another Prince quote from page 35 of the introduction. And it's Prince saying that if I want this book to be about one overarching thing, it's freedom. And the freedom to create autonomously without anyone telling you what to do or how or why. That, again, like I said, without anyone telling you how or why. And we all should strive for that freedom. Again, don't confuse responsibility. We all got to keep our lights on, food on the table, make sure the kids are fed, put to bed, healthy, happy. We all have to do that. But we all have a purpose. And we should all strive to live for that and to live as free as we can. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be an owner at anything. Sometimes it's just about owning yourself, your self-worth, your self-respect, and finding that thing that you do well that makes you happy. You could do it for free if you want, but at the same time, don't let anybody shortchange you either. And basically, that's going to end this episode of Amari Purple Talk. Also, the end of part 1 of this 3-part series. Next week, it's going to be the topic of ownership. And I hope you tune in for that one. But as far as this episode, leave me a comment and let me know your thoughts. And also, too, which album from this period was your favorite? Was it Come? Was it the Gold Experience? Emancipation? I didn't talk a lot about Emancipation, the album, in this. I just kind of got a little carried away here. But if you look at my YouTube channel, I do have an Amari Purple Talk special on the Emancipation album itself. So look at that as a sort of deeper dive for this topic of freedom this week. And again, like I said, we'll tune in next week. And until then, let's be safe. Have a great, safe holiday this week. Let's take care of each other. Let's take care of ourselves. Wear your mask. Take your vitamins. Boost that immune system. But also keep it purple and on the one.